I was sitting in my dorm room when my phone rang. Seeing Dad's name on the screen made me smile. He usually called on Sundays, and this was a Wednesday. "Hey, Dad." "Chloe, sweetie," his voice sounded different, strained. "I need to have a serious conversation with you. Can you come home?" My heart skipped a beat. Dad wasn't one for dramatics. "What's wrong?" "We should talk in person, please." I checked my calendar, midterms were coming up. "I can come in 2 weeks. Is that okay?" "Yes, that's fine," he paused. "I love you, Chloe." Those 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I could barely focus on my studies, my mind constantly wandering to what Dad might need to tell me. The train ride to my hometown felt endless. I watched familiar landscapes roll by, my stomach in knots. When I finally arrived home, my stepmother Margaret opened the door. Her face was tense, and she immediately wrapped me in a hug, something she rarely did. "He's in his office," she said quietly, leading me down the hallway. The moment I saw Dad, my blood ran cold. He sat behind his massive oak desk, but somehow he looked small, diminished. His clothes hung loose on his frame and his face was ashen. "Chloe," he smiled weakly. "Come here, sweetheart." I rushed to hug him, trying not to show how shocked I was by how fragile he felt in my arms. "Dad, what's going on?" He gestured for me to sit and took a deep breath. "The doctors found cancer, honey. It's advanced. They don't think I have much time left." The room started spinning. I felt Margaret's arms around me as I struggled to breathe. "I'm so sorry," Dad whispered. "I hope you can visit often. I want to spend as much time with you as possible." We spent the entire weekend together. Dad barely touched his food during meals, but he talked more than I'd ever heard him talk before. He told stories about my childhood, my first steps, my first words, the time I decided to paint the cat purple. And he talked about Mom. "Your mother was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen," he said, his eyes distant. "The day she walked into that coffee shop, I spilled my drink all over myself just staring at her." During these stories, Margaret would quietly slip out of the room, giving us space. Dad's voice would get softer when he talked about Mom, about how she fought her illness until the very end, how brave she was even when she knew she wouldn't see me grow up. I was 9 when Mom died, but listening to Dad's stories made her feel close again, like she was sitting right there with us. Even though my heart was breaking for Dad, those moments felt precious, like he was giving me back pieces of her I'd forgotten. After that first weekend, everything changed. I started calling Dad every day between classes, and I took the train home every weekend instead of once a month. Each time I called, his voice sounded a little weaker, but he always brightened up when I told him about my classes or campus life. At first, Margaret seemed supportive. But as the weeks went by, something shifted. The welcoming hugs stopped. Instead of warm greetings, I got curt nods. During meals, she'd sit there pushing food around her plate, refusing to make eye contact. "How are your classes going, Chloe?" Dad would ask, trying to break the tension. "Good," I'd answer, watching Margaret's jaw clench. "I got an A on my psychology paper." "That's wonderful, sweetheart." Slam. Margaret would get up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor, and storm off to the kitchen. Dad started chemotherapy in October. The hospital stays became longer, more frequent. During those times, the house felt like a war zone. Margaret stopped acknowledging my presence altogether. The sound of slamming doors followed me everywhere. The kitchen, her bedroom, the bathroom, slam, slam, slam. One Friday evening, after spending the afternoon with Dad at the hospital, I came home starving. The house was dark and cold. No dinner smells, no pots on the stove. Nothing. I found Margaret in the living room, scrolling through her phone. "What's for dinner?" I asked. She looked up, her face hard. "I didn't make anything. I wasn't counting on having to feed you." The words felt like a slap. "What do you mean? I'm here every weekend now," Exactly, she put down her phone. You're here every weekend. If you want to eat, cook for yourself. I stared at her, stunned by her tone. What's going on, Margaret? Why are you acting like this? Nothing's going on, her voice dripped with sarcasm. I just think you're coming here a bit too often. My father has cancer, I said, my voice shaking. He's sick. Of course I'm coming to see him. She muttered something under her breath and turned back to her phone, dismissing me completely. I stood there for a moment, then went upstairs without dinner. As I lay in my bed, listening to another door slam somewhere in the house, I thought about telling Dad. But he had enough to worry about with his treatments. The last thing he needed was to know about this tension between his wife and daughter. After a month of intense chemotherapy, Dad was finally released from the hospital. His doctors seemed cautiously optimistic, saying his body was responding well to the treatment. When I got this news, I immediately booked my usual weekend train ticket home, eager to see him in better spirits. The autumn air was crisp as I walked up our driveway that Friday afternoon. Something felt different, there were more cars than usual parked outside. I recognized one of them instantly, Mark's sleek black Nissan that he never shut up about when we were teenagers. My stomach tightened. If Mark was here, that meant Jessica probably was too. I hadn't seen my step-siblings in over a year, and that was fine by me. Jessica, being a year older, always made it clear she considered herself superior. And Mark, 6 years my senior, treated me like I was too young to exist in his orbit. The front door was unlocked. As I stepped inside, I found Dad in his favorite armchair, looking tired but better than he had in weeks. His smile when he saw me made my heart warm. There's my girl, he said, reaching for a hug. How are you feeling, Dad? Before we could talk more, Margaret appeared with Jessica and Mark in tow. I greeted them and excused myself to take my bags upstairs. As I climbed the stairs, I could hear them all laughing about something in the kitchen. The sound made me feel like an outsider in my own home, a feeling I thought I'd left behind when they all moved out years ago. I reached my bedroom door and froze. The door was open, and inside was definitely not my room anymore. My vintage movie posters were gone, replaced by Jessica's pretentious art prints. My purple bedspread was nowhere to seen, instead, there was some fancy white duvet with about 50 decorative pillows. Jessica's clothes were hanging in my closet, her makeup scattered across my dresser. I stormed back downstairs, my hands shaking. Margaret, can I talk to you for a minute? Privately? She followed me into the living room, that artificial smile still plastered on her face. Why is Jessica in my room? I demanded, trying to keep my voice down. Oh, that, she waved her hand dismissively. Well, since they're moving back, it made sense to give Jessica the larger room. You're only here on weekends, after all. That's my room, I said through gritted teeth. It's always been my room. There are 2 perfectly good guest rooms upstairs. Do you really want to upset your father over something so trivial? She whispered, her smile never wavering. He's finally feeling better. Do you want him to have to deal with this drama? Over a bedroom? The words hit their mark perfectly. I looked over at Dad, who was chatting happily with Mark about something. He did look better, there was more color in his face than I'd seen in weeks. My shoulders slumped in defeat. Fine. Which guest room can I use? The small one at the end of the hall, Margaret said sweetly. Jessica's things are in the other one. I bit my tongue and headed upstairs to move my weekend bag to my new room, if you could even call it that. The room was tiny, with barely enough space for a twin bed and a small dresser. The walls were an awful beige color I'd always hated, and the window overlooked the neighbor's brick wall. The next morning, we all gathered for lunch. Dad sat at the head of the table, picking at his special diet food while the rest of us had Margaret's pot roast. The silence was deafening until I decided to address the elephant in the room. So, Jessica, I said, trying to keep my voice casual, how long are you planning to stay? Jessica looked up from her plate with that irritating smirk I remembered so well from our teenage years. Oh, I'm not just staying, I'm moving back permanently. Someone needs to be here to take care of Dad, after all. Since you're so busy with college and everything. I felt my face flush. I come home every weekend. Weekends aren't enough, Jessica interrupted. Dad needs constant care and attention. But don't worry, I'll handle it. I'm happy to make the sacrifice. Mark cleared his throat. Yeah, I'm staying too. Got some remote work lined up. Figure the family should stick together during tough times. I glanced at Margaret, who was watching the exchange with undisguised